Chapter 9. An hour passed and darkness settled in. Theo sat at his small desk, a card table equipped with lawyerly things, a daily planner, a small digital clock, a fake fountain pen set, his own nameplate carved in wood. Before it was an open algebra textbook. He'd been staring at it for a long time, unable to read the words or turn the pages. His notebook was open, too, and the page was blank. He could think of nothing but April and the horror of watching from a distance as the police fished her body from the backwaters of the Yangtze River. He had not actually seen the body, but he had seen the police and scuba divers surround something and work frantically to remove it. Obviously, it was a body, a dead person. Why else would the police be there, doing what they were doing? There had been no other missing person in Strattonburg or in the past week, or the past year for that matter. The list had only one name on it, and Theo was convinced that April was dead, abducted and murdered and thrown in the water by Jack Leeper. Theo couldn't wait for Leeper's trial. He hoped it would happen soon, just a few blocks away from the county courthouse. He would watch every moment of it, even if he had to skip school. Maybe he could be called as a witness. He wasn't sure what he would say on the witness stand, but he would say whatever it took to nail Leeper, to get him convicted and sent away forever. It would be a great moment. Theo being called as a witness, walking into the packed courtroom, placing his hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth, taking a seat in the witness box, smiling up at Judge Henry Gantry, glancing confidently in the faces of the jurors, taking in the large audience, then glaring at the hideous face of Jack Leeper, staring him down in open court, fearless. The more Theo thought about this scene, the more he liked it. There was a good chance Theo was the last person to talk to April before she was abducted. He could testify that he was frightened and surprisingly alone. Entry, that would be the issue. How did the attacker get into the house? Perhaps only Theo knew that she had locked all the doors and windows and even jammed chairs under the doorknobs because she was so frightened. So, since there was no sign of a break-in, she knew the identity of the abductor. She knew Jack Leeper. Somehow, he had been able to persuade her to open the door. As Theo replayed his last conversation with April, he became convinced that he would indeed be called by the prosecution as a witness. For a few moments, he visualized himself in the courtroom. Then he suddenly forgot about it. The shock of the tragedy returned, and he realized his eyes were moist again. His throat was tight, and his stomach ached, and Theo needed to be around another human. Elsa was gone for the day, as were Dorothy and Vince. His mother had a client in her office with the door locked. His father was upstairs pushing paper around his desk and trying to finish some big deal. Theo stepped over a judge, and looked at the sketch April had given him. Again, he touched her name. They met in pre-kindergarten. Theo couldn't remember exactly when or how. 4-year-olds don't actually meet and introduce themselves. They just sort of show up at school and get to know each other. April was in his class. Miss Sansing was a teacher. In the first and second grades, April was in another section, and Theo hardly saw her. By the third grade, the natural forces of aging had kicked in, and the boys wanted nothing to do with girls, and vice versa. Theo vaguely recalled that April moved away for a year or two. He forgot about her, as did most of the kids in his grade, but he remembered the day she returned. He was sitting in Mr. Hancock's 6th grade class during the second week of school when the door opened and April walked in. She was escorted by an assistant principal who introduced her and explained that her family had just moved back to Strattonburg. She seemed embarrassed by the attention, and when she sat at the desk next to Theo, she glanced at him and smiled and said, "Hi, Theo." He smiled but was unable to respond. Most of the class remembered her, though, and though she was quiet, almost shy, so he had no trouble resuming old friendships with the girls. So he wasn't popular because he didn't try to be. So he wasn't unpopular because he was generally nice and thoughtful and acted more mature than most of her classmates. She was odd enough to keep the others guessing. She dressed more like a boy and wore her hair very short. She didn't like sports or television or the internet. Instead, she painted and studied art and talked of living in Paris or Santa Fe, where she could do nothing but paint. She loved contemporary art that baffled her classmates and teachers alike. Soon there were rumors about her weird family, of her siblings named after months, of a wacky mother who peddled goat cheese, and of an absentee father. Throughout the 6th grade and into the 7th, April became more withdrawn and moodier. She said very little in class and missed more school days than any other student. As the hormones kicked in and the gender walls came down, it slowly became cool for a boy to have a girlfriend. The cuter and more popular girls were chased and caught, but not April. She showed no interest in boys and didn't have a clue when it came to flirting. She was aloof, often lost in her own world. Theo liked her, and he had for a long time, but was too shy and too self-conscious to make a move. He wasn't sure how to make a move, and April seemed unapproachable. It happened in gym class on a cold, snowy afternoon in late February. 2 sections of 7th graders had just begun a 1-hour torture session under the command of Mr. Bart Tyler, a young hotshot physical education teacher who fancied himself as a Marine drill instructor. The students, both boys and girls, had just completed a set of brutal wind sprints when Theo suddenly couldn't catch his breath. He ran for his backpack in a corner, pulled out his inhaler, and took several puffs of medication. This happened occasionally, and though his classmates understood, Theo was always embarrassed. He was actually exempt from gym, but he insisted on participating. Mr. Tyler showed the right amount of concern and led Theo to a spot of bleachers. He was humiliated. As Mr. Tyler walked away and began blowing his whistle and yelling, April Fenimore left the crowd and took a seat next to Theo, very close. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm fine," he answered as he began to think that maybe an asthma attack wasn't so bad after all. She placed a hand on his knee and looked at him with tremendous concern. A loud voice yelled, "Hey, April, what are you doing?" It was Mr. Tyler. She coolly turned and said, "I'm taking a break." "Oh, really? I don't recall approving a break. Get back in line." To which she repeated icily, "I said I'm taking a break." Mr. Tyler paused for a second, then managed to say, "And why is that?" "Because I have an asthma condition, just like Theo." At that point, no one knew if April was telling the truth, but no one, especially Mr. Tyler, seemed to be willing to push harder. All right, he said, and then blew his whistle at the rest of the kids. For the first time in his young life, Theo was thrilled to have asthma. For the remainder of the period, Theo and April sat knee to knee at the bleachers, watching the others sweat and groan, giggling at the less than athletic ones, mocking Mr. Tyler, gossiping about the classmates they were not so fond of, and whispering about life in general. That night they Facebooked for the first time. A sudden knock at the door startled Theo, followed by his father's voice. "Theo, open up." Theo quickly stepped to the door, unlocked, and opened it. "Are you okay?" Mr. Boone asked. "Sure, Dad." "Look, there are a couple of policemen here, and they would like to talk to you." Theo was too confused to respond. His father continued, "I'm not sure what they want. Probably just more background on April. Let's talk to them in the library. Both your mother and I will be with you." Okay." They met in the library. Detectives Slater and Capshaw were standing and chatting gravely with Mrs. Boone when Theo walked in. Introductions were made. Seats were taken. Theo was secured with a parent lawyer on each side. The detectives were directly across the table. As usual, Slater did the talking and Capshaw took the notes. Slater began, "Sorry to barge in like this, but you may have heard that a body was pulled from the river this afternoon." All three Boones nodded. Theo was not about to admit that he had watched the police from the cliff across the river. He was not about to say any more than necessary. Slater went on, the crime lab people are at work right now trying to identify the body. Frankly, it's not easy because the body is, well, shall we say, somewhat decomposed." The knot in Theo's chest grew tighter. His throat ached, and he told himself not to start crying. April decomposed? He just wanted to go home, go to his room, lock his door, lie on his bed, stare at the ceiling, then go into a coma and wake up in a year. "We talked to their mother," Slater said softly, with great patience and compassion, "and she tells us that you were April's best friend. You guys talked all the time, hung out a lot. That true?" Theo shook his head, but could not speak. Slater glanced at Capshaw, who returned the glance without stopping his pen. "What we need, Theo, is any information about what April might have been wearing when she disappeared," Slater said. Capshaw added, "The body at the crime lab has the remains of some clothing on it. It could help with identification." As soon as Capshaw paused, Slater moved in. "We have made an inventory of her clothing with her mother's help. She said that perhaps you'd given her an item or two, a baseball jacket of some sort." Theo swallowed hard and tried to speak clearly. "Yes, sir. Last year I gave April a twins baseball jacket and a twins cap." Capshaw wrote even faster. Slater said, "Can you describe this jacket?" Theo shrugged and said, "Sure. It was dark blue with red trim, Minnesota colors with the word twins across the back in red and white lettering. Leather, cloth, cotton, synthetic? I don't know. Synthetic maybe. I think the lining on the inside was cotton, but I'm not sure." The two detectives exchanged ominous looks. "Can I ask why you gave it to her?" Slater said, "Sure. I won an online contest at the Twins website, and since I always had 2 or 3 Twins jackets, I gave it to April. It was a medium, kid's size, too small for me." "She was a baseball fan?" Capshaw asked. "Not really. She doesn't like sports. The gift was sort of a joke." "Did she wear it often?" "I never saw her wear it. I don't think she wore the cap either." "Why the Twins?" Capshaw asked. Is that really important?" Miss Boone shot across the table. Capshaw flinched as though he had been slapped. "No, sorry." "Where is this going?" Mr. Boone demanded. Both detectives exhaled in unison, then took another breath. Slater said, "We have not found such a jacket in April's closet or anywhere in her room, or the house for that matter. I guess we can assume that she was wearing it when she left. The temperature was around 60 degrees, so she probably grabbed the nearest jacket." "And the clothing on the body?" Miss Boone asked. Both detectives squirmed in unison, then glanced at each other. Slater said, "We really can't say at this time, Miss Boone. They may have been prohibited from saying anything, but their body language was not that difficult to read. The jacket Theo had just described matched whatever they had found on the body, at least in Theo's opinion." His parents nodded as if they understood completely, but Theo did not. He had a dozen questions for the police, but did not have the energy to start firing away. "What about dental records?" Mr. Boone asked. Both detectives frowned and shook their heads. "Not possible," Slater said. The answer provoked all manner of horrible images. The body was so mangled and damaged that the jaws were missing. Miss Boone jumped in quickly with, "What about DNA testing?" "In the works," Slater said, "but it'll take at least 3 days." Capshaw slowly closed his notepad and put his pen in a pocket. Slater glanced at his watch. The detectives were suddenly ready to leave. They had the information they were after, and if they stayed longer, there might be more questions about the investigation from the Boone family, questions they did not want to answer. They thanked Theo, expressed their concerns about his friend, and said goodnight to Mr. and Miss Boone. Theo stayed in his seat at the table, staring blankly at the wall, his thoughts a jumbled mess of fear, sadness, and disbelief. And that's the end of chapter 9.